All right, Inside Out. Hey, how you guys feeling tonight? You guys feeling good? That's what I love to hear, y'all. Well, hey, my name is Matt Keeney, and I'm so excited to be up here with you guys tonight for the final part of the series that I've been in called Relationship Goals. Like we said before, we're going to have multiple communicators up here tonight. I'm going to be the first one up here tonight. And I was talking with our Inside Out director, Jordan, and I was like, dude, I don't really know how to start this tonight. You know, I'm single right now. I don't really have that much relationship advice to give. How do I start talking tonight? And he was like, do you have any like self-depreciating, like funny, like bad first date stories? And I was like, dude, I don't know where to begin, because I've had my fair share of bad first date stories. So if it's cool with you guys, I'm going to share my most recent one, if that's okay. You guys want to hear that? Yes. Okay. So this was about 1.5 years ago. I met this girl through a mutual friend. We hung out a couple times, and then I asked her out to dinner. Guys, I picked her up. I went to the front door. We went to a great restaurant, and then, yeah, there we go. Hype it up. Yeah, I love it. Yeah, okay. Everything about the first 30 minutes of this date was great, textbook. It was awesome. And then she asked me one question. She was like, Matt, what is your favorite movie of all time? Now I had to think a little bit. I love movies. I love all types of movies. But hands down, and hold for applause, because I know this is a lot of people's favorite movie. My favorite movie of all time is Star Wars Episode 5, Empire Strikes Back. Any Star Wars fans in here? Yeah, there we go. It's by far a great movie, probably my favorite movie of all time. And she said back to me, she's like, oh, I've never seen that before. So immediately I knew she wasn't the one. So I was like, really? She hasn't seen it before. So usually when someone says they haven't seen a movie before, you just spend like 5 to 10 minutes talking like a very minor plot about the movie, and then you move on with your life. That's not me. That's not what I did. I explained the entire plot of Empire Strikes Back, and I explained the entire plot of the first original 6 Star Wars movies. Now, these are 6 3-hour movies that I talked about for 45 minutes straight about Star Wars, which is every girl's dream. I know it is. So we were talking about it. I started all the way back to Anakin Skywalker, and Star Wars fans follow me along here. We started with Anakin Skywalker and Phantom Menace. You know, no one likes Phantom Menace, but we started with that. And then how he met Obi-Wan Kenobi, and through all these times, he was his Padawan, and it was amazing. It was super fun. And then in the 3rd episode, Anakin meets Chancellor Palpatine, and Chancellor Palpatine is an evil dude. He's the evil Sith Lord, and he turns Anakin bad, which is like no bueno, okay? And it was doing all these things, and then Obi-Wan was like really mad at Anakin for turning bad, and he's like, you know, you were the chosen one, Anakin, and he's doing all these stuff. While this was all happening, you know, Luke and Leia were born, and then Anakin becomes Darth Vader. 30 years later, okay, Luke and Leia, you know, make out, and they're brother and sister, which is so totally weird. And then in this episode right here, Darth Vader's like, Luke, I am your father, and all of this stuff happens, and just imagine this going on for 45 straight minutes. And then I wrap up the entire conversation by trying to make a Chewbacca noise, and my voice cracked like 1,000,000 times. It sounded like a squirrel getting run over by a car. It sounded absolutely terrible. And I wrapped up this entire 45-minute conversation by saying, you know what, if you really, really want, I can take you back to my place, and I can show you my lightsaber. And I know what you guys are thinking. But I was honestly talking about my lightsaber. It's like, it was just bad. It was not good. It went terribly wrong. But I don't know why I didn't get a second date. Anyways, it was absolutely terrible, which is just awful. Anyways, it's a silly story, but it kind of drives the conversation that we're starting tonight. Like I said, we're going to have 3 different communicators up here, and maybe looking back on it, I probably shouldn't have spent 45 minutes talking about all of the Star Wars. It's a little childish to think like that. And the way we're going to start tonight is when I'm up here right now, I'm just going to talk to one specific group in the room, okay? Where are my dudes at? Where are my men at, right? Oh, men, yeah. There you guys are, okay? I'm going to talk to you guys while with my time up here. And the way I want to strive and the way I want to start our conversation tonight is to pick up where we kind of left off last week, okay? So Jeremy, one of my best friends, he was up here. He talked about a verse in 1 Corinthians that was talking about like the love chapter. You hear this a lot at weddings, like love is patient, love is kind, all that stuff. To start our conversation, guys, we're going to look at the verse right after that. And it says in 1 Corinthians, Paul is writing to the city of Corinth. He says, when I was a child, I talked like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. But when I became a man, I put the ways of childhood behind me. Now, this is really fascinating, okay? I think every guy in here wants to be one day a man, or we consider ourselves men right now. All of us in here want to be a man one day, right, guys? But Paul is saying to be that, we have to put the ways of childhood behind us. So to drive our conversation tonight, I want to look at what is Paul specifically meaning by putting the ways of childhood behind us, especially when it comes to the women in our life. What are we doing right now that is childish by treating and acting and loving in a way to the women in our life? Now, to understand kind of first century context, why Paul is writing this, back in the first century, men had this sense of entitlement, men had this power, and they viewed women as property. They viewed women as having zero value, almost zero value, and they viewed women as property. It was a really, really tough time for women back then, and men had this childlike thinking that they were immensely superior to women, which makes what Paul is about to write. Paul writes about half the New Testament. Paul's about to write another letter in the letter of Ephesians, and he's about to say something that's radically new to the men, Christian and unchristian, back in the first century. He says this: husbands, love your wives. Now it's 2019, and guys, we hear this and we're like, well, duh, right? Let's just treat our women the best we can. Let's love our girls the best we can. Let's respect them the best that we can. And for the most part, we're really good at that. The best that we possibly can do, that's what we'll do. Back then, that wasn't the case. He's saying, husbands, love your wives. And a lot of times right now, we have this childlike thinking of like, okay, I'm going to love her the best that I can. I'm going to respect her the best that I can. What Paul is about to say in the next sentence is about to give us a standard for how to do that. What does that mean? No longer is it the best we can. He's about to give us a standard of what we should do and the standard of what we should follow when it comes to respecting and treating and loving the women in our lives. He said, husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. I can imagine someone in the first century reading this and they're like, that's brand new. Wait, Paul, didn't Jesus die for the church? Didn't Jesus give up his life for the church? Paul would say, exactly. Paul would say, exactly. No longer can we have this childlike thinking of the way that we treat women, the way that we value women. When Jesus died, he elevated the status of women like that. When Jesus was alive and here on earth, he constantly empowered and elevated the status of women. No longer did women have zero value when Jesus died. Paul is saying this is the brand new way that we should think about the way we treat and value and honor and love and respect the women in our lives. Now, this looks like a lot of different ways, guys. Maybe we're really good at this. Maybe we treat them the best that we can, but maybe we don't. Maybe we're not doing the very best that we can. Maybe we're not living up to the standard right now. What do we do right now? Personally, I think it's time to renew our minds when it comes to the women in our lives. Right now in 2019, I'm not saying all guys in the room do this. I'm just saying our culture and our society, we have this really good idea of thinking childlike when it comes to the women in our lives. We don't think in the standard of giving ourselves up fully for our girls, our women in our lives. That's not the case right now. But what I'm saying is it's time to renew our thinking. What Paul is saying is that when Jesus died, when Jesus looked and valued a woman, he said, you are a child, you are the daughter of God. And you are someone whom I would die and give up my life for. If we have that mindset, guys, that every single girl, our moms, our sisters, our girlfriends, our teachers, every single girl we come in contact with, if we have that mindset that she is someone that I would die for, she is the daughter of God, and she is made in his image, and she is someone that whom Jesus died for, our relationships will radically change. It will be brand new to our relationships. But what does that mean? How do we renew our minds to the women in our lives? Here's a simple thing that we can do. Guys, we can do this right now, tonight. Very simple. And girls, you guys are going to want this. Just hold the door open for her. That's as simple as it gets. Just hold the door open for her, saying, you before me. It's very easy like that. That's something that we can do tonight. Some of the things that it takes to renew our minds is a lot harder than that. It takes a lot more time. It takes practice to try and do those things. One of those things, when it comes to whatever this idea is of locker room talk, whatever this is, basically what this is when you're with your group, your guys, your friends, everybody that you know and respect, and she's not around. She's not in the room. What does this mean? what is locker room talk? Basically, it's everything that you're doing when she is not around. You know what separates between a child and a man is what you say about her when she is not around. It's crazy, though, because when we are with our guys, I'm not saying that we don't have to be honest. I'm not saying that we don't have to be authentic about how we're feeling. If she makes you mad, I'm not saying you have to stuff that in. What I'm saying is even our language towards the women in our lives. Do we have the courage? Do we have the new mindset of saying, I'm not going to say that about a girl anymore? Like, guys, is it really reasonable? Think about this. Is there any reason we should call a girl a slut? Like, let's be real. Is there any reason in our minds that we should call a girl a slut? Let's say that you're fighting with your girl. Let's say that you just got into a fight with your mom or your teacher or your sister or whatever, okay? Is there any reason to call a girl a bitch? Let's think about that. That is the childish ways of thinking that Paul is talking about. He's saying, let's be men. When we're in the locker room, when we're with our guys, let's just be respectful enough to know that she is a daughter of God and she should be treated in such a way. She is someone whom Jesus died for. It's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take men of courage to start this. And it's going to be hard. What are my friends going to say about me if I stand up and say, that's not okay? What are my friends going to say about me? When Jesus died, he elevated the status of women like that. And I don't want this to sound like Matt is shaming you. Matt wants you to feel guilty. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is right now, this is just me personally, I want to make a better future for women right now. Because in 2019, they are having some first century type thinking right now. I want to elevate the status of women. We've got to make a better future for women right now. And it talks about putting all the childish ways of thinking behind us. If you've been zoning out for 10 minutes, the one thing that I want you guys to remember is just to honor her.
All right, so up front, by a show of hands, how many of you guys have had a bad first impression of someone? Like you had a conversation, met someone, experienced something, had a bad first impression. Okay, I've definitely had plenty of bad first impressions. They've got better over time, but one that sticks with me to this day, and it's kind of silly, I know, but it happened in kindergarten. Here's a picture of me, first day of kindergarten. Okay, and so this takes place, I know, I was in kindergarten, but it takes place a week before the first day of kindergarten. This is me on the first day of kindergarten, and it was a week before, and it was Meet the Teacher Day, okay? And my teacher was supposed to come to my house and, introduce herself so I could know who my kindergarten teacher was gonna be. But she emails my mom, and she's like, okay, I can't make it. I'm just gonna have a phone call instead. So I'm like this little kindergartner girl, and I'm like, oh, okay, that's fine. I'm fine. It's fine. Okay, so I'm waiting all day for this phone call from this woman I've never met because I'm super excited that she's gonna be my kindergarten teacher. I'm super excited to be a big kid, go to elementary school, all of those sorts of things. So I've been pacing by the voicemail machine literally all day, and then finally, I miss her phone call because I'm not even there. And so I get into the room later, and the voicemail machine, it's like blinking, and I'm like, Mom, she's called. We gotta go answer, and like listen to what she said. So my mom presses play on the voicemail, and she starts going down all the things that your kindergarten teacher would say, I'm blah, 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 I'm super excited for this year, I'm super excited for everything we're gonna learn this year, all those sorts of things. And then she finishes the phone call with a line I don't think I'll ever forget or live down, and it sounds kind of silly, but back then it was like everything. She finishes the phone call, and she says, and I'm so excited to have clean in my class this year. Now, that may not sound like a big deal now, but this little kindergartner, my name's Klein, by the way, but I was sitting there and I was like, oh my gosh. And I look up at my mom and I just start bawling. Like, I wish you guys could see this moment because I'm just bawling my eyes out. I was terrified that my kindergarten teacher would think my name was Clean. Like, that's awful. No one wants their teacher to know their name wrong. And back then I was like this shy little kindergartner, so I was scared that I'd never speak up and like correct her, and forever, like through high school and college, everyone would think my name was wrong. Of course, this is my kindergarten imagination, so I was like, this is the end of the world. But it ended up being fine, worked out. My mom called her back and was like, yo, that's not her name. And so back then it was kind of a rough experience, but I've gotten over it a little bit. Anyway, so the reason that I share that story, that bad first impression with you guys tonight, is because what we're gonna be talking about tonight on my end, on my part, part of this message, it has a bad first impression. Just gonna give you that disclaimer up front. Has a bad first impression. You may have some tension with it up front. Like Matt said earlier, he was specifically talking to the guys, and right now I'm specifically gonna be talking to the girls, but I think girls. But I think it's just as important that the guys hear this too. Now, by no means am I an expert by anything that we're gonna be talking about tonight, but I love what we're gonna be talking about tonight, and I think it's important. It goes into the conversation that we've had and started throughout the rest of this series. So the verse that I'm gonna be talking about tonight that, like I said, has a bad first impression up front, it's Ephesians 5:22, and earlier Matt was talking from another verse in Ephesians. Mine's from the same kind of area of that book, and it starts off like this. It says, wives, so ladies, girls in the room, it says, wives, submit, and I'm like, okay. Wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands as you do to the Lord. Yikes. Now, the first time I read this, I was like, what in the world? What? Holy smokes, what is this trying to say? Why does a verse like this even exist? And if you're in the room and you have any sort of tension or you're like, what does this mean? I was definitely there with you. But my goal tonight for the next 5, 6, 7 minutes is to kind of take away any sort of tension, any sort of bad first impression that you may have with this verse. And to do that, I want to give a little bit of context, a little bit of backstory of why this verse exists, kind of where it comes from. And so Paul, he is the writer of the book of Ephesians in the New Testament, and Paul is writing this verse specifically, and the one that Matt was talking about earlier, to provide examples of what it would look like to be a Christian back then. So back then, Jesus kind of had just arrived on earth, and he started teaching this brand new kind of framework, this brand new foundation that no one had heard before. And so Paul's goal in writing many stories and examples and parables in the New Testament was to give examples of what Jesus was trying to teach. Now, if you've been around North Point for a while, maybe you would call yourself a Christian, but more specifically, if you've been around North Point for a while, you may have heard us say before that we think like the entire Bible, all of Christianity, every law, every commandment can be simplified or condensed down into the single law or commandment of just simply choosing to love one another. So to us, for me at least, this kind of seems like old-fashioned. Like we're kind of used to people saying, be kind, treat others the way that you want to be treated. But this was the brand new foundation and framework that Jesus had introduced during this time. Back then, culture and society like this was foreign. This did not make sense. So when Jesus came and was like, guys, we should love one another, people were like, okay, cool, but how? What does this even look like? Their society didn't know or understand what this meant back then. And so Paul's goal in writing this verse and other verses in the book of Ephesians was to provide examples of what it looked like to love one another. And the one that I just shared with you guys up front, he was trying to write that verse to provide an example, to explain what it looked like to love one another in the context of marriage. So the verse that Matt talked through earlier and the one that I just showed you, this was Paul's attempt to say this is what it looks like to love one another in terms of marriage. Now, like I said earlier, this was a brand new kind of framework. This was something completely different to their society at the time. In fact, what their society or what was normal for their culture, it looked more like this. Okay, so if you had any sort of status, any sort of power, any sort of influence, this is what culture or society would say it looked like. So if I had power, status, influence, those sorts of things, what I need to focus on, what I need to worry about is myself. Everyone was thinking about themselves. It was yourself, yourself, yourself. So if I was a husband and I had a wife, my main focus was what she could do for me. She was my property, commodity, and I treated her that way. And if I was a king and I had people and I had influence over all of these people, my only worry was what they could do for me. I would tell them what they could do, what they couldn't do. I would hurt, I would kill them even because it only mattered about myself. Now, this was culture, this was society, this was normal back then. So you could imagine when Jesus came and was like, hey, guys, I'm actually going to flip the script. This is actually what I think it looks like is more like this. The people were a little bit confused because what Jesus was teaching during this time was if you had power, if you had influence, if you had status, any of those sorts of things, you should be at the bottom. You should treat everyone else as if they have more power, if they have more status. You should love and value everyone around you. If you are a husband, you should treat your wife like she is the most valuable thing in the world. You should respect her, honor her, care for her. If you are a leader, you have a nation full of people, you should honor and love every single one of them. That was the bottom line of the framework that Jesus was trying to introduce during this time. So the main goal of Paul writing in Ephesians and talking about kind of marriage right there was to describe what it looks like to love one another in the context of that sort of relationship. Now, if I were to take a shot in the dark random guess at why that verse right here is offensive at all, I would guess it probably has something to do with this word, just a guess, that it has something to do with the word submit. Because when I first read this verse, and maybe some of you guys too, my first thought was like, okay, does that mean we're just like less than, subordinate, that we should just like compromise on what's important to us, that we should just serve them because they're more valuable, more important? Like, what is this verse trying to say? I had a lot of tension, a bad first impression with that one word. But what's really interesting to me is actually when we look at the most authentic, most direct translation of that text, that word isn't even in there. In fact, Paul is writing Ephesians in Greek. And so over the years, this Greek kind of text manuscript, it's been translated to English, different versions down the road. And a more direct, the most authentic kind of translation that we have of this one verse, it would actually read more like this. It would say, wives to the own husbands as to the Lord. In other words, what Paul was trying to communicate with this verse is that, ladies, if you're in a relationship, a friendship, a marriage, those sorts of things, what God has asked us to do in order to love one another is to love Him. It's to love whoever you're in a relationship with. Is to care for them. Is to respect Him. Is to honor Him. Honor the other one whenever he's not there to hear what you have to say about him. Honor him in the way that you communicate and the way that you behave in your character. Honor him when he won't find out what you have to say about him, when he will find out what you have to say about him. Honor him when he's not around, when he is around. That's what Paul was trying to communicate with this verse. What Paul was never intending to communicate with this verse is that we are less than and we should just compromise on our morals or compromise on our values or compromise what's important to us because we're just less than and we should just serve and we should just submit. That was never the intention of this verse. In fact, Jesus was the very first leader that had power and status and influence to say, no. Women have equal value to men and should be treated as such. In fact, Jesus would actually speak to women, like he would talk to women. He would look women in the eye. He would walk with women. He would teach women. He would communicate and value women, like to the point where his own disciples would be sitting there and be like, he's talking to a woman. What is he doing? Like, it was weird. It was uncomfortable because that wasn't society. That wasn't their cultural norm at the time. But Jesus was like, no. Women are equal to men and should be treated as such. And that's what Paul and Jesus were intending to communicate through that verse. I think Jesus would agree that in terms of a relationship, you may have different hobbies, you may have different talents, dreams, or desires, but you don't have different value. I think in terms of that verse, Ephesians 5:22, when Paul writes that, when he says, wives, submit, is that wrong? Is that weird? Is that supposed to come off the wrong way? Like, I don't think in the context of what Paul was trying to communicate, what was trying to communicate and tell us in that moment, I don't think that was intended to be offensive. I don't think that was intended to have a bad first impression or come off the wrong way, because Paul's main goal in writing that verse was to communicate what it looks like. How can we love one another? In terms of value, he says, no, they're completely equal. Women and men completely equal and should be treated as such. So girls, in terms of a relationship or a friendship or a future marriage, those sorts of things, how do we know that we have that right? How do we know that we are choosing to love one another? I think Paul and Jesus would agree it's truly just as simple as choosing to honor him.
All right. Hey, you guys, real quick, just to start, you know what's dumb? First of all, Texas weather is dumb. I just walked around the outside of the building to get here. You could go to the pool on Friday and hope for a snow day tomorrow. Like, that is ridiculous. Texas weather is dumb, but that has nothing to do with tonight. You know what is dumb related specifically to tonight? Maybe an unpopular opinion, but personally, I think love at first sight is dumb. Here's why I think love at first sight is dumb. I don't mean to bash every romantic Hollywood movie that there's ever been. I don't mean to, downplay any famous couples or anything like that, okay? Here's why love at first sight is dumb when you walk by somebody on a boat and just meet and fall in love. is because it takes no effort, no intentionality, no communication, no trust. There is no relationship. You don't even know the person on the other side of you. Really, my personal opinion, I think two people are just like turned on and they make eye contact and all of a sudden they're like, we're in love. Yeah, there's nothing like significant there. I don't think that's like romantic. I don't think that's something we should aspire after. And yet, a lot of times in culture, what we're taught or what we hear is if you just find that person that perfectly matches you, I mean, come on, you won't even have to work. It won't even be hard. It won't even be difficult because you guys will just complete each other in such a way. But I don't think there's anything impressive about a relationship like that. You know what actually makes a great relationship? In any relationship. Relationship with your family, your parents, your brother, sister, with a friend, with a boyfriend, with a girlfriend. You know what makes a great relationship? It's what Matt and what Klein have been talking about tonight. It's when this happens, when two people mutually honor and respect one another and treat each other accordingly. Honor and respect one another and treat each other, not just talk about it or think about it, but treat each other as if that is true. So what are you supposed to do with what you've heard tonight? When you hear something like honor him or honor her, like, are you just supposed to try harder? I don't think that's the application, because when you just try harder, you eventually get tired. If you're just like, I'm just going to work a little bit harder to be nicer to him or nicer to her, you will eventually go back to the way that you treated people before you showed up tonight. In order for us to be different in our relationships going forward, in any relationship, whether a dating relationship or a friendship, a perspective has to change. We have to see people, we have to see men, we have to see women differently than when we woke up today. And so I want to talk about exactly how it is we're supposed to look at one another. Not just the person that you're in a relationship with, but all people. And the answer to that is in the verse before the one that we just looked at. So we looked at verse 25 with Matt, where he said, husbands, love your wives. Klein looked at verse 22, where it says, wives, submit to your husbands. But the first verse is the one that makes the whole section make sense, because it's like the title to the chapter. It's what gives everything else that comes after it context. And the first verse of this section of this paragraph reads this way. It says, submit. Again, starts off with our word, but it says, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. So he tells everybody to submit to each other out of awe, out of respect, out of admiration for Christ. Then he just gives a bunch of examples and he says, wives, here's what that looks like for you. Husbands, here's what that looks like for you. He goes on and talks to fathers about how to parent, kids about how to respect their parents. He has all of these applications, but it starts with saying, submit to one another. How or why? Out of reverence for Christ. Out of reverence for the God of the universe, to say, who am I? That the creator of the universe would look at me and know my name and decide that I have purpose and value, and to create plans for my life from before the beginning of time and send his son to die for me. If I have that kind of value, and if everybody I've ever had a conversation with has that value as well, well, now we should treat each other differently. He's saying this is what you do. The word submit is this. The application of submit is really power under control. Submit is not a weak word. If you don't have anything to bring to the table, if you don't have any value to bring to the table, there's nothing for you to submit. This implies that you have value, that every single one of us in the room are worthy of value and respect. And we are going to choose to use what it is that we bring to the table, our value, our ideas, our creativity, our gifts, our time, our resources to benefit somebody else. It looks kind of like this. If we were to complete the triangle, it looks like saying you have two people, and this really can be any relationship. You can be friends, you can be brother, sister, you can be dating, whatever it might be. And it looks like saying, hey, at the top of this relationship is the one who gets to say and speak on what our value and worth is. And when you put God first in this relationship, now all of a sudden you don't have an unfair pressure on the other person. Because if there's somebody in your life, maybe it's a friend, maybe it's a best friend, maybe it's a parent, maybe it's a boyfriend or a girlfriend, if there's somebody in your life that decides for you if you're okay with you, meaning I only feel good about myself when they're not mad at me, I only feel good about myself if they like me, I only feel good about myself if we're on the right page or if we're in a relationship, but man, whenever we're not, I feel terrible about myself. You've made that person number one in your life, and you have just put an unfair expectation on them that they could never, ever live up to. No matter how amazing they are, nobody will ever, ever be perfect. But when you decide, you know what, my value and my worth comes from the one who made me, that's already been set. That's already been decided. That has nothing to do with what I do or what I don't do, the decisions I make, but with the fact that the creator of the universe says, I'm his son, I'm his daughter, and he sent his son for me. Now, that frees you up to look at the person on the other side of you, the friend or the person that you're currently dating, and you're able to say, I'm going to leverage me for you. I'm going to put my power under control and try to make your life better as a result. You know how you treat people when this is how you look at relationships? When you see everybody as made in the image of God and worthy of honor and respect, it's like everybody you meet should feel like a celebrity. I don't know if you guys have ever met somebody famous, ever met a celebrity or went backstage at a concert or something like that. The one that's most vivid for me is I remember I got to meet Nick Foles because Nick is really good childhood friends with Emily, my wife. They like call each other cousins. And Nick won the Super Bowl last year. He beat Tom Brady. He was the Super Bowl MVP. And I remember getting to meet this guy, and I shook his hand, and he's really tall, and his hand is way bigger than mine. And it was like that moment where I just like wanted to seem cool and like had no ability to do that. Like I didn't know what to say, but I just don't want to embarrass myself. And I like shook his hand, and I'm like, yeah, so football, shoulder pads, touchdowns, right? You know? And I'm like, I have no idea what to say. I'm so nervous. But it was this moment where I had like this awe and this respect for this guy because he's this celebrity in my mind. I definitely wasn't going to critique his game. I wasn't going to like insult him. I wasn't going to tell him what he should do with his career. I was just there, and I was like, I have this respect and this awe for you already. That's what the picture looks like. That's what the picture looks like, to say everybody around you has that kind of value and worth, and so you should treat them accordingly. Matt said, honor her, and Klein said, honor him. Really, our bottom line to summarize all of that is, what if we would just honor each other? How different would all of our relationships be? How different would our schools be, our teams be? How different would our dating relationships be if we just all did that? If we just decided to honor each other? Because it's not an on-off switch. Ladies, if you want to know how he really feels about women and thinks about women, not just one that he can get something out of if he talks or acts a certain way, but all women, just look at how he talks about all women. Look at how he talks about and interacts with his mom or his sister or his other friends. Pay attention to the way that he talks about his ex-girlfriend, because he may talk about you that way in the future. Does he honor all women or just women that he can get something from? It's not an on-off switch, but it's this choice to honor one another, to say just permanently, this is the value that I believe all humans have. So what does that look like practically? It impacts, like Matt was talking about earlier, our language, the labels that we give people, the identities that we give people, the anger behind our language, the things that we say, the intention to hurt. It looks like impacting, changing the language we use with one another. When you think about the world of communication that is your phone, when you think about what you text somebody, when you think about what you say on the phone, when you think about the world of social media, do you use that to build people up, to honor people, or do you use that to tear people down? Do you use that to pressure somebody unnecessarily, to get something out of somebody, or do you use it to honor them in the way you interact with people? When you think about the physical side of a relationship, do you think about, how can I honor this person physically? Do you think about their future? Do you think about their future husband, their future wife, their kids someday? Or do you just think, man, what can I get out of this relationship? When you think about your communication or your actions, generally with this person, are you defensive? Do you blame them a lot? Are you angry with them a lot? Are you passive aggressive? Do you try to control? Or are you humble? Are you trying to discover them? Are you trying to see, how is it that I can benefit this friendship or this dating relationship? If we make the commitment to honor each other, this is the goal of relationships. In this kind of triangle, in this kind of picture, there is something possible in relationships that most people don't discover. But it's extraordinary the story you will live and the kinds of relationships you will have if you just choose to say, that's how I see all men. That's how I see all women. Because nobody No leader, no religious leader, no political leader, no celebrity has ever ascribed as much value and worth and dignity to women as the person of Jesus. And no leader, no political leader, no religious leader, no celebrity has ever applied as much value and dignity and worth to men as the person of Jesus. Because he applied that to all people. He raised the value of all people by saying, you are made in my image. You are my son, you are my daughter, and I have come to give my life for you. When that's our example, that's our source, and that is our inspiration, we treat, we see, we value, and we honor people differently. In our small groups today, I want to talk about, in all relationships, what does it look like to honor one another? How are we doing with this? And what is the potential of taking a step in this area? I'd love to conclude our time by praying, and then we'll break to our rooms. Heavenly Father, God, thank you that you have spoken so clearly on this, that everybody in this room has more value and worth than we could ever express or describe with words. God, sometimes we don't treat each other as if that's true or as if we believe that. But God, today in our groups, would you give us an image and a window of what that looks like? God, whether we've been here a long time or here for the first time today, can you show us what it looks like to treat all people with a different kind of dignity and value, to submit to one another, which is not a weak thing, but leverage what we have for the benefit of those around us, because you set that example for us first. God, we're so excited to see what this looks like and what is possible as a result. We love you and we need you. It's in Jesus' name that we pray. Amen.